This presentation is part of a workshop voicing indigenous food sovereignty struggles, which has been organized by the project Indigenous Food Systems in Transition, financed by Future Food at the Swedish University for Agricultural Sciences. Furthermore, the workshop was organized in collaboration with Case Study 18 of the Horizon 2020 Finance project, Just North. You are welcome to listen to the lecture.
And I would like to give the first word to Ildikor Ashtalas Morel, the head of this project, which is going to focus on diverse challenges for maintaining indigenous food systems. And she's presenting about indigenous food sovereignty struggles in the North. Please, Ildikor.
Yeah, thank you. I am to talk about indigenous food sovereignty struggles in the global North. And since we have invited Canadian Indigenous organizations to this final workshop, I wanted to find some kind of common point of departure for my presentation. And I thought to take this departure from the fate of the buffalo. There have been 30 million buffaloes in the Great Plains of America in the 1870s. Sioux, Kiowa, and Comanche used buffalo skins for tents and buffalo meat for food. They raised against colonization and forced settlement into reservations. Nonetheless, to ensure the security of railroads and settlers, the Indian question had to be solved. To kill the buffalo, the food reserves for the Indians was the solution. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. With the help of the US Army, joined with hunters and businessmen taking advantage, buffaloes were driven close to extinct by the end of that century. Indigenous food struggles are rooted in the history of colonization that proceeded by more or less overt force, combining the powers of the state and the market in diverse forms of colonial land grabbing. Reservations became one of the means for the containment of indigenous people and limitation of their access to environmental resources. Geographic containment has also been applied to contain Sami reindeer herders' use and right to pastures, to so-called reindeer herding communities, Lapp villages or Sami villages. Furthermore, the state and church undermined the transfer of Sami culture and language through the institution of boarding schools built on the civilizing and the rasbiological ideology. Boarding schools have been widely used to undermine indigenous cultures throughout the global North. Nils Henrik Sikku's words at the ceremonial pardon by the Swedish Church, the 24th of November this year, so a few days ago, for the oppression of Sami by the Church may best describe what it meant. Our lifestyle was nothing worth. We learned to write and talk a foreign language. We were fed with alien instead of our inherited useful knowledge. We got enclosed, dislocated, silenced. The land of Sami should be with threat and goods blessing erased. Today, indigenous livelihoods and culture are protected by international and national laws. These include the right of consultation and self-determination, as we are to hear later in the lecture of Hossein Kambru. Yet, the problem is the gap between law and being able to live up to that. The ability of Sami reindeer herders, like the ability of other indigenous people to access traditional food resources, continues to be under intensifying cumulative threats from the expansion of water plants, mines, forestry, wind power, infrastructure, tourism, and we could continue. Backed up by the state openly or by lack of action. Indigenous livelihoods have been further undermined by the domination of the current globalized agri-food regime, the principles of which have been ratified by national governments joining the World Trade Organization. By joining, states relinquish their right to set protective agricultural policies. The emerging neoliberal free trade regime was found to favor global corporate supply chains, resulting in a system of food from nowhere. The underlying protectionistic market ethos advocates economic growth, which is being achieved by the use of fossil energy, chemicals, monocultures, and so on, precarizing local indigenous communities. The issue of food security and food sovereignty addresses different questions. Food security, for food security, the key issue has been insufficient access to and supply of food, what has been identified as the hunger frame. Rather, food sovereignty addresses a community frame. That is to say, the inequalities that underlie the systems of production, consumption, and demands more local community control over food and policy and an ethical agenda. These issues juvenated the rise of the La Via Campesina, the Peasant Way movement, a coalition with roots in peasant, women's, and indigenous peoples' movements in Mexico that today encompass 182 organizations. However, food sovereignty movements take different shapes. Natalia Manonova pinned the term silent food sovereignty to describe the persistence of household-based agricultural production resisting post-socialist transition. This kind of silent food sovereignty without an agentic activist movement could characterize the indigenous movements of the post-socialist Arctic, where focus has been on the maintenance of indigenous livelihoods in the pathways between indigenous ways of reindeer herding and an incorporation to food markets nationally and internationally. But what distinguishes indigenous food systems? As Charlotte Cottier emphasizes, indigenous value systems see the relationship between humans and earth as a partnership. Land is not to be treated as property, real estate, capital, or natural resources. Rather, the indigenous worldview engages land not as a machine, but as a community of respected non-human persons to whom we humans have a responsibility. Indigenous food systems follow the cyclicity of nature and engage with local biodiversity, that is to say, produce food from somewhere. Against this backdrop, food sovereignty movements see the relationship between indigenous ethics and the market differently. For some, Indigenous values are irreconcilable with the market. A view Dan Morrison's keynote is to address later today. While others aim to carve out livelihoods, negotiating with the market paradigm, and will regain control over the value produced by indigenous people. To conclude, I would like to lift up some examples of the issues we discussed during our different workshops. One of the key concerns that were raised by Sami organizations has been how to document Sami traditions, as a Swedish-Finnish Sami Interreg project exemplifies, which will be presented also later. Slow Food Sapmi's work connects to the slow food movement's way to certify heritage products, and by this regain indigenous ownership over cultural heritage and over how this heritage can be commercialized in a respectful way to traditional culture. However, the desire to enforce cultural sovereignty and to retain the holistic values of the Sami traditional food system often come into conflict with the rationality of the market. Reindeer herders, as an example, slaughter practices are not solely driven by market prices. The maintenance of the herd comes first. Several contributors are going to address these dilemmas, especially in the sessions tomorrow. Meanwhile, reindeer herding is part of the food economy, which is built on market-driven principles. Reindeer herders' livelihood depends on the food chain. Therefore, when promoting food sovereignty, Sami institutions and organizations act on two fronts. They support the struggle to ensure access to pasture for reindeer herding on the one hand, while on the other, they support Sami small-scale enterprises connecting Sami heritage to processes in the further up in the food chain. Reflections, among others from Russia, have also called attention to the challenges that emerge when international and national food chains buy up reindeer. They not only extract profit, but the export from Arctic regions is endangering the availability of nutritious food adjusted to the Arctic climate. Reindeer-based diets are replaced by lower nutritious value food, as the research team of Elena Bogdanova is going to surely address in the coming lectures. Indigenous food systems rely to a large degree on uncultivated food resources that are found in the Arctic climate. Diet has been adjusted to the natural variation of what has been available locally in different seasons. Indigenous food from nature has higher nutritious value than produced food, as Lena Maria Nilsson and the Russian Medical Research Group studies are going to highlight later on today. To conclude, I would like to say a few words about the role of the state and the issues that came up in our earlier workshops. So what are the issues the state would need to address? First of all, states should secure indigenous food systems threatened by the ongoing destruction of pasture land. The state has also an important role in improving the administrative and technological hinders in the reindeer food chain. Support to innovation need to incorporate indigenous know-how. We will have an example on projects presented by Maria Udén and Anneli Päiviö on how what kind of work is done in this field. Also, digital technologies are to be promoted. These can offer new opportunities to scaling up indigenous economies. We will have lectures by Mandela and Maxim on this topic. But the state also needs to incorporate Sami food in the diets of the state institutions. And knowledge about Sami food needs to come into school curriculum. Besides strengthening the knowledge about Sami culture at large in educational systems. We had also two bachelor students who engaged with a study of regional food strategies in the northernmost provinces of Sweden, which will be presented, and it is a critical perspective on the productionistic visions of food strategies. Thus, to conclude, even more, we need an indigenous perspective on food and also see how this food these issues of food sovereignty and indigenous knowledge about food has very high relevance for solving future challenges of sustainable food systems. Thank you so much for me.